Before the beaches of southern Bali became famous across the world, before millions of tourists filled its airports, its resorts and its cafes, there was another land, a land that stood quietly on the island's western frontier, a place where every traveller passed through, yet almost nobody stopped to truly see. Its name is Jembrana. For countless visitors, Jembrana is nothing more than the road from the ferry to the rest of Bali, a brief stop between two destinations, a place crossed in a hurry before reaching somewhere else. But that assumption could not be more wrong, because beneath its quiet landscapes lies one of Bali's oldest surviving stories, a story that began not hundreds of years ago, but thousands, long before modern Indonesia existed, long before the first kingdoms rose across the archipelago, long before maps carried the name Bali. People were already living here. Archaeological evidence suggests that human settlements in what is now Jembrana existed nearly 6,000 years ago. Think about that for a moment. 6,000 years. That means while many civilizations around the world were still discovering agriculture, communities had already begun building lives on this western edge of Bali. Generations were born, generations disappeared. Empires rose and collapsed. Religions spread across continents. Trade routes transformed the world. Yet life in this corner of Bali continued, adapting to every new chapter of history without ever losing its soul. This is not simply another regency. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited landscapes on the island. Every hill, every river, every coastline carries memories that no monument can fully preserve. And perhaps nowhere is that sense of mystery stronger than in the very name itself, Jembrana. The name is believed to originate from the ancient phrase Jembrana, a vast wilderness, an immense forest, a land once covered by dense jungle where towering trees stretched endlessly toward the sky. But the old stories tell us something even more fascinating. According to local tradition, this immense forest was said to be ruled by a mythical serpent king, the Naga Raja. Whether understood as mythology, symbolism, or cultural memory, the legend reflects something deeply rooted in Balinese tradition. Nature was never seen as something to conquer, it was something to respect. Mountains possessed spirits, forests guarded secrets, rivers carried blessings, and every landscape existed within a sacred balance connecting humans, nature, and the divine. For centuries, these stories were passed from one generation to another, not through books, not through classrooms, but through voices. Grandparents speaking beneath evening skies, village elders sharing ancient tales around family gatherings, children listening with wide eyes as legends became part of their identity. Because history is not always written on paper, sometimes history survives inside people. As communities grew, Jembrana slowly transformed from an untamed wilderness into a homeland. Different ethnic groups arrived over centuries. Balinese Hindus established villages rooted in tradition. Muslim communities settled and contributed their own customs and knowledge. Traders traveled across the Bali Strait. Fishermen crossed dangerous waters. Farmers cultivated fertile plains. Every new arrival added another layer to Jembrana's identity. Yet instead of erasing one another, these cultures learned something extraordinary. They coexisted. That harmony would become one of Jembrana's greatest strengths. Unlike many places where diversity became a source of conflict, here it often became the foundation of resilience. Different beliefs, different languages, different traditions, yet one shared home. Today, that legacy remains visible. The majority of Jembrana's population practices Hinduism. Large Muslim communities have lived here for generations. Christian, Catholic, Buddhist, and Confucian communities also contribute to its social fabric. This remarkable diversity is not an accident. It is the result of centuries of shared history. a reminder that identity does not become weaker through diversity, it becomes richer. The official motto of Jembrana captures this philosophy beautifully. Tri Ananta Bhakti, 3 eternal devotions. Devotion to God, devotion to the homeland, and devotion to life itself. These are not merely ceremonial words engraved beneath an official emblem. They represent values that continue to shape everyday life. You can feel them in the quiet temples standing beside village roads, in the mosques where generations gather for prayer, in the fishermen leaving before dawn despite uncertain seas, in the farmers who continue working fields cultivated by their ancestors, in families preserving traditions not because they are required to, but because they understand something priceless. A culture only survives when ordinary people choose to protect it. As centuries passed, Jembrana's growing communities required leadership. From scattered settlements emerged organised societies. From villages came kingdoms, and from those kingdoms emerged rulers whose influence would shape Western Bali for generations to come. One name would become inseparable from the destiny of this land, I Gusti Madayasa. In the early 17th century, this influential leader established a royal centre known as Puri Gede Jembrana. It became far more than a palace. It became the political heart of an emerging kingdom. Within its walls, decisions affecting thousands of lives were made. Diplomacy unfolded, traditions evolved, power shifted. The palace symbolised stability during an era when kingdoms across the Indonesian archipelago constantly negotiated alliances, rivalries, and survival. The rulers who followed inherited not only authority, but responsibility to protect their people, to preserve their customs, and to maintain the delicate balance between power and spirituality that defined Balinese kingship. Royal heirlooms became symbols of legitimacy, sacred spears, ceremonial weapons, ancient kris blades believed to carry spiritual significance. Among them was the legendary heirloom known as Kitatas. More than a weapon, it represented the authority of the kingdom itself. Because throughout Southeast Asian history, power was never measured solely by military strength. True leadership required wisdom, moral responsibility, and the trust of the people. That trust would soon face its greatest challenge, because beyond the horizon, another power was approaching, one that would change not only Jembrana, but the future of Indonesia itself. The world beyond Bali was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Across the seas, European colonial powers were expanding their influence throughout Asia. They came first as merchants, searching for spices, timber, and profitable trade routes. But history had already shown their pattern. Trade became influence became control, and control eventually became empire. Even an island as beautiful and culturally rich as Bali could not remain untouched forever. For the kingdom of Jembrana, survival was becoming increasingly complicated. Its rulers no longer had to think only about neighbouring kingdoms. They now faced powerful foreign governments equipped with modern bureaucracies, organised armies, and ambitions that stretched across entire continents. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Every alliance could determine the future of generations. As the kingdom evolved, a new royal centre emerged during the early 19th century. The government was moved to a newly established palace known as Puri Agum Negara. This was more than a change of residence. It marked the beginning of a new political era. The city of Negara, which today serves as the capital of Jembrana Regency, traces much of its historical importance to this royal transition. Its streets may appear peaceful today, but centuries ago, they stood at the centre of diplomacy, administration, and royal authority. Kings governed from here. Policies were discussed. Disputes were resolved. Ceremonies reinforced the bond between the rulers, the people, and the spiritual world. For Balinese kingdoms, governance was never simply about power. Leadership was expected to uphold harmony, harmony between humanity and nature, harmony between different communities, harmony between earthly responsibilities and divine guidance. That philosophy remains deeply embedded in Balinese culture today, yet maintaining harmony was becoming increasingly difficult. European colonial expansion was transforming Southeast Asia. Kingdom after kingdom found itself negotiating with governments whose priorities were fundamentally different. The Dutch East Indies administration viewed territory through the language of administration, taxation, and political control. Traditional kingdoms viewed land as something much deeper. Land carried ancestors. Land carried sacred responsibilities. Land carried identity. These two visions were destined to collide. In 1849, one of the defining moments in Jembrana's political history took place. A bilateral agreement was signed between the Kingdom of Jembrana and the Dutch colonial government. From one perspective, it represented diplomacy. From another, it reflected the unavoidable reality facing many indigenous kingdoms across the archipelago. Negotiation had become a necessity. The rulers of Jembrana understood the dangers surrounding them. Military confrontation with a global colonial power carried unimaginable risks. Diplomacy offered hope, but diplomacy also demanded compromise. History rarely presents simple heroes and villains. Instead, it presents impossible choices. Choices made under extraordinary pressure. Choices whose consequences may only become fully understood generations later. Soon, the political structure of Jembrana began to change dramatically. The traditional kingdom gradually gave way to a modern colonial administrative system known as a regency. Instead of ruling solely as monarchs, local leaders increasingly became part of the Dutch bureaucratic framework. The transformation was gradual but profound. Ancient royal customs now existed alongside European administrative systems. Traditional authority adapted to modern governance. It was an era filled with uncertainty. Some traditions disappeared, others survived by evolving, and some became even stronger precisely because people feared losing them. This story was not unique to Jembrana. Across Indonesia, local societies faced similar challenges. Communities had to decide what could change and what must never change. Languages evolved, political systems shifted, economic priorities transformed. But culture became the anchor. One remarkable aspect of Jembrana during this period was its multicultural character. Unlike the common misconception that Bali has always been culturally uniform, Western Bali developed through centuries of interaction between diverse communities. Balinese Hindus lived alongside Muslim families whose ancestors had settled generations earlier. Traders crossed the Bali Strait from neighbouring Java. Fishing communities exchanged goods, traditions, and stories. Intermarriage strengthened social connections. Markets became places where cultures met peacefully. Instead of building walls, people built relationships. This coexistence became one of Jembrana's greatest strengths. It demonstrated something increasingly rare in today's world, that different identities do not have to erase one another. They can grow stronger together. Religious diversity became an ordinary part of everyday life. Temple festivals filled villages with music, offerings, and prayer. Nearby, the call to prayer echoed from mosques that had served local communities for generations. Christian churches welcomed their congregations. Buddhist temples quietly reflected another spiritual tradition woven into the same landscape. Rather than competing for space, these communities became neighbours. Children grew up seeing difference not as a threat, but as a normal part of life. Perhaps that is one of Jembrana's greatest lessons. Tolerance is not created through speeches. It is built through daily encounters, through sharing meals, through helping neighbours, through respecting celebrations that may not belong to your own faith, but still belong to your community. This quiet strength often escapes the attention of visitors. Many travellers pass through Jembrana without realising they are witnessing one of Bali's most authentic examples of social harmony. Because the loudest places are not always the strongest. Sometimes, the strongest communities are the ones that do not need to prove themselves. As the 19th century drew toward its close, another significant transformation reshaped the region. In 1895, the Dutch colonial administration officially recognised Negara as the administrative capital of the Afdeling Jembrana. It may sound like a bureaucratic adjustment, but its impact reached far beyond government paperwork. For the first time, Negara emerged with its own distinct administrative identity rather than existing under a broader regional capital. The name became permanently associated with Western Bali, and over a century later, it remains the capital of Jembrana. Names matter. They preserve memory. They connect modern generations with the decisions made by those who came before. Every road sign reading Negara quietly carries more than a destination. It carries history. It carries the legacy of kingdoms. It carries the evolution of governance. It carries the resilience of people who adapted without surrendering their identity. Then came another turning point, the 20th century, a century that would bring war, occupation, revolution, independence, and the birth of modern Indonesia. For Jembrana, the greatest tests were still ahead. The world was about to change forever, and this quiet corner of Western Bali would once again find itself standing at the crossroads of history. The 20th century arrived with promises of progress. Railways expanded across continents. Steamships connected distant civilizations. Technology accelerated at a pace humanity had never experienced before. But alongside that progress came uncertainty. Colonial rule tightened its grip across much of Southeast Asia, including the Indonesian archipelago. For the people of Jembrana, history was no longer unfolding in distant capitals. It was unfolding in their own villages, in their own fields, along their own coastlines. Life continued much as it always had. Farmers still rose before sunrise. Fishermen still read the rhythm of the tides better than any compass. Temple bells continued to echo through the hills. Families gathered for ceremonies that honored both ancestors and future generations. Yet beyond these familiar routines, political change was accelerating. Traditional kingdoms throughout Bali were gradually incorporated into increasingly centralized colonial administration. The role of local rulers shifted. Authority that had once been absolute became constrained by regulations written hundreds of kilometers away. Ancient customs now existed alongside modern bureaucracy. It was a balancing act that required extraordinary resilience. Then, the world descended into one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Second World War. The conflict reached far beyond Europe. Across Asia, imperial powers collided. The Dutch colonial government weakened. Japan advanced rapidly across the region. In 1942, Japanese forces occupied the Dutch East Indies, including Bali. For many Indonesians, the arrival of a new power initially created hope that colonial rule might finally come to an end. But reality proved far more complicated. The Japanese occupation brought hardship, forced labor, shortages, and fear. Communities throughout Indonesia endured years of uncertainty. Jembrana was no exception. Its strategic location on Bali's western coast gave it significance far beyond its population. The Bali Strait, separating Bali from Java, had always been an important maritime corridor. Whoever controlled this gateway possessed influence over one of Indonesia's critical sea crossings. Even today, thousands of people travel through this route every single day. During times of conflict, however, such geography carried far greater importance. It influenced military logistics, trade, communication, and survival itself. When the Second World War finally ended in 1945, another struggle immediately began. Indonesia declared its independence on the 17th of August, 1945. It was a bold declaration, an extraordinary act of courage, but declaring independence and securing it were two very different challenges. The years that followed became a fierce struggle for sovereignty. Across the archipelago, ordinary Indonesians risked everything to defend the dream of becoming a free nation. Some fought with weapons, others fought through diplomacy. Many fought simply by refusing to surrender hope. Jembrana experienced this turbulent transition alongside the rest of Bali. Political systems changed repeatedly. Colonial administration collapsed. Japanese rule ended. The Republic of Indonesia emerged. Then came the complex federal period of the state of East Indonesia. Finally, Indonesia reunited as a unitary republic. For many communities, these rapid political changes were confusing. Governments changed, flags changed, administrative structures changed, but daily life continued. Parents still raised children, farmers still planted rice, fishermen still faced unpredictable seas, communities still gathered for ceremonies that reminded them who they were. History often focuses on presidents, generals, and diplomats, yet the true strength of any nation is found elsewhere. It is found in ordinary people who continue building their future despite extraordinary uncertainty. That is exactly what happened in Jembrana. Generation after generation chose continuity over despair. They protected their traditions without isolating themselves from progress. They welcomed change without abandoning their identity. That quiet determination helped shape the region that exists today. In 1958, Jembrana officially became a regency under Indonesian law. It marked the beginning of a new chapter. No longer defined primarily by kingdoms or colonial administration, Jembrana entered the era of modern regional government within an independent Indonesia. The following year, the position of regent became the highest local executive office, replacing the political structures of earlier centuries. Yet despite these institutional changes, one thing remained constant. The capital continued to be Negara. More than a century after its designation during the colonial period, the city remained the administrative and cultural heart of Western Bali. Sometimes history does not erase the past. Sometimes it builds upon it. Today, Negara is not merely a government center. It is a living reminder of every era that shaped Jembrana. The age of kingdoms, the colonial years, the struggle for independence, the birth of modern Indonesia. Each chapter left its mark. Each generation added another layer. And perhaps that is what makes Jembrana so remarkable. Its history is not frozen inside museums. It lives in everyday life. Walk through its neighborhoods and you will notice something different from the image of Bali promoted in glossy travel magazines. Here, life moves at its own rhythm. Children ride bicycles along quiet streets. Neighbors greet one another by name. Morning markets come alive with conversations that have been repeated for generations. Fishermen return with a day's catch, while families prepare offerings for temple ceremonies. This is not a performance created for tourists. This is simply life, authentic, unhurried, rooted. And perhaps that authenticity is becoming increasingly rare in the modern world. As globalization connects every corner of the planet, many places begin to resemble one another. The same stores, the same advertisements, the same lifestyles. Yet Jembrana continues to preserve something priceless, a sense of place, a feeling that you are standing somewhere with its own unique story, its own identity, its own heartbeat. The Regency covers more than 840 square kilometers, stretching across the western edge of Bali. To the north rise forested mountains that catch cool air drifting through the highlands. To the south, the vast Indian Ocean crashes relentlessly against the coastline. To the west lies the Bali Strait, the narrow stretch of water that has connected Bali and Java for centuries. And to the east, the road continues toward the rest of the island. Geography has always shaped destiny. Jembrana became Bali's western gateway not because of politics, but because of nature itself. Every traveller arriving by land from Java enters Bali through this region. Millions have crossed these roads, yet remarkably few stop to understand the place welcoming them. Most simply drive onward, unaware that they have already entered one of the island's oldest cultural landscapes, unaware that beneath these forests lie thousands of years of human history, unaware that beyond the highways exists a community whose identity has survived kingdoms, colonialism, occupation, revolution, and modernity. Perhaps that is Jembrana's greatest paradox. It is one of Bali's most important places, yet it remains one of its least understood. And the deeper you travel into its landscapes, the more extraordinary its story becomes. Because Jembrana is not remembered only for its history, it is remembered for traditions found nowhere else on earth. Traditions born not from spectacle, but from the enduring bond between people, animals, the land, and a culture that has refused to disappear. If there is one tradition that captures the spirit of Jembrana more than any other, it is not hidden inside a palace. It is not locked away in a museum. It is not displayed behind glass. It races across open fields with thunder shaking the earth beneath it. This is Makepung, one of the most extraordinary cultural traditions in all of Indonesia, and perhaps one of the world's most overlooked spectacles. At first glance, it may look like a race, two powerful water buffalo pulling a decorated wooden chariot across a muddy track. The animals charge forward, mud explodes into the air, spectators cheer with excitement. The drivers balance with astonishing precision as they guide their buffalo at breathtaking speed. But if you think Makepung is simply a competition, you have missed its true meaning. Because Makepung is not merely about winning, it is about identity, it is about history, it is about remembering where a community came from. Long before engines replaced muscle, before tractors transformed agriculture, and before paved roads connected villages, water buffalo were among the most valuable partners a farmer could have. They prepared rice fields, they transported harvests, they represented strength, endurance, and prosperity. They were never treated as disposable tools. They were respected companions in the rhythm of rural life. After the planting season ended, farmers naturally began comparing whose buffalo were the strongest. What started as friendly contests gradually evolved into organized races. Over time, those races became celebrations. Those celebrations became traditions, and those traditions became one of the defining symbols of Jembrana itself. Unlike modern motorsports driven by technology and engineering, Makepung remains deeply connected to the relationship between humans and animals. The buffalo are carefully trained. Proper nutrition becomes essential. Their health is closely monitored. Many owners care for their buffalo with extraordinary dedication throughout the year. These magnificent animals are often treated like members of the family. They are groomed meticulously, decorated with vibrant ornaments, prepared with patience rather than force. Because victory is not achieved through fear, it is achieved through trust. That trust cannot be built overnight. It takes months, sometimes years. Driver and buffalo learn to understand one another through countless hours together. Every command, every movement, every subtle shift in direction. A successful team moves almost as a single living being. Watching Makepung in person is unlike watching any ordinary sporting event. The anticipation begins long before the race itself. Villagers gather, families reunite, children run through the crowds filled with excitement. Traditional music fills the air. Colourful decorations transform ordinary fields into places of celebration. What unfolds is not simply entertainment. It is a community expressing pride in its heritage. As the race begins, silence lasts only for a heartbeat. Then comes the thunder. Powerful buffalo launch forward with astonishing acceleration. Mud flies high into the sky. The drivers lean with incredible balance, guiding their teams along narrow tracks where every second matters. The sound is unforgettable. The pounding of hooves, the cheers of thousands, the rhythmic encouragement from supporters. The energy becomes almost contagious. Yet, despite the fierce competition, respect remains central to the event. Rivals may compete intensely on the track, but they share the same purpose beyond it: to preserve a tradition inherited from generations before them. That may be Makepung's greatest victory, not producing champions, but preserving culture. In a world where countless traditions disappear every year, Jembrana continues to protect one that remains authentic. It has adapted to modern audiences without losing its original spirit. That balance is remarkably difficult to achieve. Many cultural performances eventually become commercial attractions, pieces of entertainment designed primarily for visitors. Makepung has certainly attracted tourists. Photographers travel from around the world hoping to capture its dramatic beauty. Filmmakers are fascinated by its cinematic intensity. Travel writers often describe it as one of Bali's hidden treasures. Yet, despite growing international attention, the heart of Makepung still belongs to the local communities. It is celebrated because the people love it, not because visitors expect it. That distinction makes all the difference. Culture survives when it continues to matter to the people who inherit it. Jembrana understands this better than most places. Its traditions are not performances created for outsiders. They are living expressions of identity. And Makepung is only one example. Throughout the Regency, ceremonies continue to connect generations. Traditional music echoes through villages during religious festivals. Balinese dances preserve stories that have been passed down for centuries. Craftsmanship continues in workshops where skills move from parents to children just as they always have. Every offering placed before a temple, every prayer whispered before sunrise, every celebration shared by an entire village reinforces a simple truth. Culture is not something preserved once. It must be renewed every single day. Perhaps that is why Jembrana feels different. It is not trying to convince anyone of its authenticity, it simply lives it. The pace of life encourages people to notice what modern society often forgets: the changing seasons, the sound of birds returning to the forests, the smell of rain arriving from the mountains, the rhythm of the tides along the southern coast. Nature is not separate from daily life here. It is woven into it. The northern part of Jembrana rises into rugged highlands covered by forests and volcanic landscapes. 17 mountains shape the region's dramatic skyline. Among them stands Mount Merbuk, the highest peak in the Regency, reaching nearly 1,400 metres above sea level. Nearby peaks such as Mount Mesehe, Mount Bangul and Mount Lesung create a chain of elevated terrain that captures moisture from seasonal winds. These mountains are more than scenic landmarks. They feed rivers that nourish farms below. They provide habitats for countless species of plants and wildlife. They influence local weather, creating cooler temperatures in the uplands, while the southern plains remain warm beneath the tropical sun. Travel from those mountains toward the coast, and the landscape changes completely. Dense forests gradually give way to fertile farmland. Rice fields shimmer beneath the sunlight like mirrors stretching toward the horizon. Coconut palms sway gently in the ocean breeze. Fishing villages line the coastline where generations have earned their living from the sea. Along the southern edge, the immense Indian Ocean reminds everyone of nature's raw power. Its waves crash endlessly against the shore, shaping beaches that remain remarkably peaceful compared to Bali's more crowded tourist destinations. Here, the ocean is not merely admired, it is respected. Its beauty inspires awe. Its strength demands humility. For centuries, fishermen have understood that lesson better than anyone. They know the sea can provide abundance. They also know it must never be taken for granted. That understanding reflects something much larger than geography. It reflects the philosophy that has shaped Jembrana for thousands of years. Live with nature, respect nature, protect nature, because the future of every generation depends upon the choices made by the present one. And nowhere is that relationship between humanity and the natural world more visible than at the western edge of Bali, where land, sea, and history come together to welcome everyone who enters the island. Most people see it simply as a ferry terminal. The people of Jembrana know it as something far more significant. For millions of people every year, their first step onto the island of Bali does not happen at an airport. It happens here, on the western shoreline of Jembrana, at Gili Manuk. For most travellers, it is only a point of arrival, a place to buy a ticket, a place to board a ferry, a place to continue the journey. Cars roll off the ships, motorcycles weave through the traffic. Buses filled with families, students, workers and tourists move steadily toward the island's interior. Within minutes, most of them are gone, heading east, toward beaches they have seen on social media, toward temples featured in travel magazines, toward destinations recognized around the world. Few ever pause to ask a simple question. What is the story of the place that welcomed them first? Gili Manuk is much more than Bali's busiest western gateway. Its strategic position has shaped the history of the island for centuries. Long before modern ferries crossed the Bali Strait, this narrow stretch of water connected civilizations. Merchants sailed between Java and Bali, carrying spices, rice, textiles, ceramics, and precious metals. Fishermen navigated these waters, guided not by satellites or electronic maps, but by stars, winds, tides, and generations of inherited knowledge. Religious ideas crossed here, languages crossed here, families crossed here, cultures met here. The Bali Strait has never been a barrier, it has always been a bridge. This constant movement explains why Jembrana developed such a unique cultural identity. Western Bali became a meeting point where traditions blended without losing their individuality. Balinese customs flourished alongside influences from neighbouring Java. Communities learned not only to live beside one another, but to grow together. That openness continues to define Jembrana today. Walk through its markets and you will hear more than one language. Listen carefully and you may notice different accents shaped by generations of migration and exchange. The dominant local language is a distinctive variety of Balinese spoken throughout Jembrana. Alongside it, Indonesian serves as the national language, connecting people from every province. You may also hear Balinese Malay, traces of the Osing language from nearby eastern Java, and other regional dialects carried by families who made this land their home. Language tells the story of movement. Every borrowed word reflects an encounter. Every local expression preserves a memory. Every conversation carries fragments of history invisible to the casual visitor. The same can be said of faith. Jembrana's religious diversity is not simply reflected in statistics, it is visible in everyday life. Colourful temple ceremonies brighten village roads. Mosques welcome worshippers throughout the day. Churches gather their congregations every week. Buddhist communities quietly maintain their traditions. Each contributes to the identity of the region. Rather than competing for space, these communities have spent generations learning to coexist. Their shared history offers an important lesson in a world that too often emphasizes division. Unity does not require everyone to become the same. It requires mutual respect. It requires understanding. It requires the willingness to recognize another person's humanity before judging their differences. That lesson has become increasingly valuable in the 21st century. As societies around the world become more polarized, places like Jembrana remind us that peaceful coexistence is not an impossible dream. It is something real, something practiced, something built through countless ordinary acts of kindness repeated over generations. Beyond Gilimanuk, another side of Jembrana begins to reveal itself. Protected forests stretch across the western landscape. These forests are part of one of Bali's most important ecological regions, providing habitat for a remarkable diversity of wildlife. Towering trees filter the tropical sunlight into soft green shadows. Birdsong echoes through the canopy. The air feels cooler beneath ancient branches that have stood through centuries of changing history. Nature here is not an afterthought. It is the foundation upon which everything else depends. The mountains capture rain. The rivers carry life toward the plains. The fertile soils sustain agriculture. The oceans provide food and livelihoods. Every ecosystem is connected. Disturb one, and all the others eventually feel the consequences. Perhaps this is why traditional Balinese philosophy places such profound emphasis on balance. The idea that harmony between humanity, nature, and the spiritual world must be protected is not merely symbolic, it is practical wisdom. Communities understood long ago that survival depended upon maintaining this delicate relationship. Long before environmental science explained ecosystems, generations of local people already understood that forests could not be endlessly destroyed, that rivers must remain clean, that the sea deserved respect rather than exploitation. Modern conservation efforts increasingly echo principles that local communities have practiced for centuries. Sometimes ancient wisdom simply waits for the rest of the world to catch up. Jembrana also reveals another side of Bali that surprises many visitors. This is not an island made only of luxury resorts and crowded beaches. It is also an island of farmers, fishers, craftsmen, teachers, market vendors, students chasing dreams, families working hard every day to build a better future. The economy of Jembrana reflects that diversity. Agriculture remains deeply important. Rice fields continue to shape the landscape. Coconut plantations sway beneath the tropical sky. Cacao, coffee, cloves, and other crops contribute to local livelihoods. Along the coast, fishing communities support one of Bali's significant marine industries, particularly around Pengambangan, where generations have depended on the sea for both sustenance and economic opportunity. These industries may not always appear on travel brochures, yet they form the backbone of everyday life. Behind every beautiful destination are people whose work keeps communities alive. Their stories deserve to be told as much as any famous landmark. As the sun sets across western Bali, the sky above Jembrana often transforms into brilliant shades of gold, crimson, and deep violet. The light reflects across rice fields, rivers, and the calm waters of the Bali Strait. In those quiet moments, it becomes easier to understand why this land has inspired generations to remain rooted here. Not because it promises fame, not because it seeks attention, but because it offers something increasingly difficult to find: peace. The kind of peace that cannot be manufactured, the kind that grows slowly through centuries of shared history, resilient communities, and a deep respect for the land itself. Perhaps that is why so many people overlook Jembrana. Its greatest treasures are not loud enough to demand attention. They reveal themselves only to those willing to slow down, to listen, to observe, to appreciate the extraordinary beauty hidden within ordinary life. And maybe that is exactly what the modern world needs most. Not another destination designed to impress us, but a place that quietly reminds us who we are. Because the true greatness of Jembrana has never been measured by the number of tourists who visit. It has always been measured by the generations who refuse to let its history, its culture, and its spirit fade away. Their legacy lives on, not only in the temples and palaces, not only in the forests and coastlines, not only in the thunder of Makepung or the ferries crossing the Bali Strait. It lives in every child who grows up learning the stories of this remarkable land. It lives in every family that continues traditions passed down across centuries. And it lives in everyone who finally realizes that the first place they entered on the island of Bali may have been one of its greatest hidden treasures all along. Think about how extraordinary that is. Every year, millions of people dream of visiting Bali. They spend months planning their journey. They save money. They search for the perfect itinerary. They imagine turquoise beaches, emerald rice terraces, dramatic cliffs, and ancient temples. Yet the moment they finally arrive on the island by land, most of them drive straight through Jembrana without ever knowing what they have just passed. They never discover the stories buried beneath its soil. They never hear the legends whispered through its forests. They never witness the traditions that have survived for centuries. And they never realize that the gateway they hurried through is, in many ways, a reflection of Bali itself. Because Jembrana contains everything that makes Bali extraordinary: history, nature, spirituality, resilience, community, and above all, a profound respect for harmony. Harmony is not simply a beautiful idea in Bali, it is a way of life. It shapes how villages are built, how ceremonies are conducted, how forests are protected, how families relate to one another, how communities recover from hardship. For generations, the people of Jembrana have understood that prosperity is not measured only by wealth, it is measured by balance, balance between ambition and gratitude, between progress and preservation, between taking from nature and giving something back. That philosophy feels increasingly relevant today. The modern world moves at extraordinary speed. Cities grow taller every year. Technology connects billions of people in an instant. Artificial intelligence transforms industries. Information travels faster than ever before. Yet despite all this progress, many people feel disconnected from nature, disconnected from history, disconnected from their own communities. Perhaps that is why places like Jembrana matter more than ever. They remind us that development does not have to erase identity. Modernization does not require forgetting the past. A society can embrace the future while still honoring its ancestors. That balance is never easy. It demands patience, wisdom, and courage. Courage to preserve traditions, even when the outside world encourages uniformity. Courage to value culture, even when it cannot be measured in economic statistics. Courage to protect forests, even when cutting them down might offer short-term profit. courage to teach children stories that cannot be found inside textbooks. The greatest civilizations are not remembered because they built the tallest buildings. They are remembered because they preserved the values that gave those buildings meaning. That is the quiet lesson of Jembrana. Its greatest achievement is not found in a monument. It is found in continuity. Across 6,000 years of human presence, countless things have changed. Kingdoms rose and disappeared. Colonial governments arrived and departed. Wars reshaped borders. Political systems evolved. Roads replaced forest paths. Ferries replaced wooden trading vessels. Digital technology connected even the most remote communities. Yet despite all these transformations, something essential endured: the spirit of the people, their willingness to adapt without surrendering their identity, their determination to carry forward traditions inherited from generations they would never meet. That is a remarkable accomplishment, because history has shown us how fragile culture can be. Languages disappear, songs are forgotten, ceremonies fade, craftsmanship vanishes when younger generations stop learning. Entire civilizations become little more than archaeological ruins. Cultural loss rarely happens overnight. It happens quietly, one forgotten tradition at a time, one abandoned story at a time, one generation deciding that the past no longer matters. Jembrana chose a different path. Instead of allowing its heritage to disappear, it continued telling its stories, not only through museums or official ceremonies, but through everyday life, through families, through villages, through festivals, through prayer, through music, through farming, through fishing, through Makepung, through every child who grows up understanding that they are part of something much older than themselves. Perhaps that is the greatest gift any society can offer its future. Not wealth, not fame, not power, but belonging. The knowledge that you are connected to generations who came before you and responsible for generations who will come after you. Because history is not only something we inherit, it is something we create. Every decision we make becomes someone else's history. Every forest we protect, every tradition we preserve, every act of kindness we extend, every lesson we pass to our children, all of it becomes part of the story future generations will tell. That is why Jembrana deserves to be remembered, not because it competes with Bali's most famous destinations, but because it reminds us what those destinations were built upon: a deep relationship between people and place, a culture rooted in gratitude rather than consumption, a landscape treated as a partner rather than a possession, a belief that true prosperity can only exist when humans live in harmony with one another and with the natural world. In an age where so many places compete to become louder, bigger, more spectacular, Jembrana offers something infinitely more valuable: authenticity. It never needed to reinvent itself to attract attention. It simply remained true to who it has always been. And perhaps that is why its story resonates so deeply, because every person, regardless of where they come from, understands the longing to belong somewhere, to know where they came from, to feel connected to something larger than themselves. Jembrana is more than a destination on a map. It is a reminder that the greatest treasures are often the ones the world overlooks, a reminder that history does not always stand behind palace walls. Sometimes it lives in quiet villages, sometimes it echoes across rice fields, sometimes it races through muddy tracks behind a pair of powerful buffalo, sometimes it waits patiently at the edge of an island, welcoming millions of strangers who never realize the significance of the place they have just entered. But now, you know. The next time someone speaks about Bali, perhaps you will remember that its story does not begin with luxury resorts or famous beaches. It begins at its western gateway, in a land where ancient forests gave birth to legends, where kingdoms rose from the wilderness, where cultures learned to thrive together, where generations protected their heritage through centuries of change, where every mountain, every river, every coastline and every tradition carries the heartbeat of a people who refuse to let time erase who they were. This is Jembrana, not simply the gateway to Bali, but one of the island's oldest souls, a place that has quietly witnessed 6,000 years of human history, a place that proves greatness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits for someone willing to stop, to listen, and to finally see it for what it has always been, a hidden masterpiece at the edge of paradise. And perhaps, after hearing this story, the most important question is no longer, where should I visit in Bali? Perhaps the better question is, what kind of traveler do I want to be? Do you want to be the traveler who only collects photographs, or the traveler who collects understanding? Do you want to follow the same crowds, stand in the same lines, take the same pictures, and leave knowing little more than you did before? Or do you want to discover the places that still have the power to surprise you? The places where every conversation teaches you something, where every landscape carries a memory, where every tradition tells the story of a people who chose preservation over convenience. Jembrana invites you to become the second kind of traveler, not because it demands your attention, but because it quietly earns your respect. Imagine arriving before sunrise. A cool breeze drifts down from the mountains. The first light of dawn slowly paints the rice fields in shades of gold. Roosters call across distant villages. Temple bells echo softly through the morning air. Somewhere, fishermen are already returning from the sea. Elsewhere, farmers begin preparing their fields just as their parents and grandparents once did. Life awakens gently, without hurry, without spectacle, without needing an audience. There is something profoundly moving about places that continue living for themselves rather than for social media. Jembrana does not wake up each morning trying to impress the world. It wakes up simply because another day has arrived, another opportunity to plant, to harvest, to pray, to teach, to celebrate, to remember. That quiet confidence is rare. In today's world, many destinations are measured by how many people visit them, how many luxury hotels they build, how many photographs are shared online, how many trends they inspire. But numbers alone cannot measure significance. Some of the world's most meaningful places remain largely unknown. Their value cannot be counted through visitor statistics. It can only be experienced. Jembrana reminds us that history does not need millions of spectators to remain important. Culture does not lose its worth simply because it is not famous. Beauty does not become less beautiful because fewer people have seen it. In fact, sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes the places least touched by mass tourism preserve the strongest sense of identity. Their traditions remain genuine, their communities remain connected, their landscapes retain the quiet dignity that first defined them centuries ago. That is not an argument against tourism, far from it. Tourism has the power to create opportunities, to support local businesses, to encourage cultural exchange, to help preserve heritage through appreciation and investment. But meaningful tourism begins with respect. Respect for local customs, respect for sacred places, respect for nature, respect for the people whose lives continue long after visitors have gone home. The greatest travelers are not those who see the most places. They are those who leave every place better than they found it. They listen more than they speak. They learn more than they judge. They recognize that every destination is someone's home. Jembrana teaches exactly that lesson. Its people have spent generations caring for this land, protecting forests that safeguard water sources, maintaining traditions that strengthen community bonds, celebrating festivals that keep history alive, passing knowledge from grandparents to grandchildren. These are not small achievements. They are acts of stewardship, acts of love, acts of responsibility. Every generation inherited something precious, and every generation accepted the responsibility to pass it forward. Now the same responsibility belongs to all of us, not only to protect famous landmarks, but also to value places whose stories are still waiting to be heard. Because once a culture disappears, no amount of money can bring it back. Once a language falls silent, an entire way of seeing the world disappears with it. Once a tradition is forgotten, humanity becomes just a little bit poorer. Jembrana stands as proof that preservation is possible, that history can remain alive, that progress and tradition do not have to be enemies, that communities can grow without forgetting where they began. Perhaps this is why the Regency's motto continues to resonate so deeply: Tri Ananta Bhakti, 3 eternal devotions: devotion to God, devotion to the homeland, devotion to life itself. Simple words, yet they contain a philosophy powerful enough to guide generations. Imagine if more societies embraced those same principles. Imagine if development always respected nature. Imagine if economic growth always strengthened communities rather than dividing them. Imagine if success were measured not only by wealth, but by the legacy left behind. The world would look very different. Maybe that is why stories like Jembrana's deserve to travel far beyond the shores of Bali. They remind us that humanity's greatest achievements are not always technological. Sometimes they are cultural. Sometimes they are spiritual. Sometimes they are simply the quiet determination to remain faithful to values that have endured for centuries. When the ferry leaves Gilimanuk and crosses the Bali Strait toward Java, the coastline of Jembrana slowly fades into the horizon. The mountains become silhouettes, the forests merge with the sky, the villages disappear from view. But for those who truly understood what they had experienced, something remains. A new appreciation for a place that never demanded recognition, a deeper respect for the people who preserved it, a realization that some of the most extraordinary destinations on Earth are not the ones everyone talks about. They are the ones that patiently wait until the right traveler finally arrives. So the next time you hear someone say that Bali is only about beaches, luxury villas, or famous temples, tell them about the Western frontier. Tell them about a land where human history stretches back 6,000 years. Tell them about kingdoms that rose from ancient forests. Tell them about communities where different cultures learned to thrive together. Tell them about the thunder of Makepung echoing across muddy fields. Tell them about fishermen greeting the sunrise along the Bali Strait. Tell them about children inheriting stories older than memory itself. Tell them about Jembrana, because every great island has a beginning, every civilization has a heartbeat, and every paradise has a soul. For Bali, that soul has been quietly waiting on its western edge all along. And maybe, years from now, you will not remember every date. You may forget the names of kings. You may not recall every mountain, every river, or every village that shaped Jembrana's remarkable journey. That is perfectly natural. History is not meant to be memorized. It is meant to be felt. What truly matters is the feeling that remains after the story ends. The realization that every place has a past far deeper than what first meets the eye. The understanding that beneath every road lies another generation that once walked there. That beneath every field rests the labor of countless hands. That beneath every thriving community lives the legacy of people whose names may never appear in history books, yet whose sacrifices made the present possible. Jembrana is filled with those invisible heroes, the farmers who patiently cultivated the land season after season, trusting that each harvest would feed not only their own families, but future generations. The fishermen who sailed into uncertain seas before dawn, guided only by experience, instinct, and faith. The craftsmen who carved wood, forged metal, and wove textiles with extraordinary skill, knowing their work carried both beauty and tradition. The mothers who preserved songs, recipes, customs, and ceremonies inside their homes. The fathers who taught children not only how to work, but how to live with dignity. The elders who refused to let ancient stories disappear, passing them from one generation to the next with patience and pride. History often celebrates rulers, but civilizations endure because of ordinary people. People who wake before sunrise,